I can't wait to see this movie. I've been looking forward to it for months. Hey team, you made it back for another training session with your teaching coach. I'm Brian Sitchie Parker and I'm so glad you're back. So by now you probably realized that my videos are organized around three main themes. Number one, building your competence around evidence-based practices. Number two, increasing your abilities to advocate for yourself and your students in public education in general. And number three, fighting for justice in a world that still doesn't offer it easily to so many people. I have chosen these three themes because while we will all fall short of these goals from time to time, if we can fall towards these goals instead of away from them, we will be better in the long run with every tumble we take. We will all be better teachers for merely trying to use evidence-based practices. We will be better stewards of our resources and the time we have with our students by falling towards being advocates for them and for ourselves than if we didn't have that idea in our mind. And any mistakes that we make in the name of justice will put us closer to equity for all than ignoring the systems of oppression that exist around us. You don't have to be perfect, but even failure can move you forward if you fall in the right direction. So this series is focused on how we can be better managers of our classrooms. As I've stated a few times already, this isn't about control. It's about creating structures that support student engagement in their learning and in the shared sense of community that we're building for them. Whether you're someone who believes that teachers have a responsibility to run a tight ship in their classrooms, or that teachers don't have a right to impose their will on other human beings, which is something I've actually heard in the past week, I think all of us can agree that students have to understand what's expected of them in a learning situation in order to get the most out of the lessons that you've prepared. Making it clear to them what behaviors are expected is an expression of kindness, and it will predispose them to being the best learners they can be. Let's do a quick run through of the 5 requirements for tight classroom management that I introduced in a previous video. You can see that whole video by clicking right up here. So, first, we need to maximize structure. Second, we need to establish and teach rules. That's this video. Third, we need to actively engage our students during instruction. Fourth, we need to use a variety of strategies to respond to appropriate behaviors. And fifth, we need to use a variety of strategies to respond to inappropriate behaviors. So let's get on to the topic of this video, establishing and teaching rules. To start off, I want you to think about some rules that exist in the grocery store that you go to. Do you see people running up and down the aisles? Do you see people carrying the things that they're buying in their pockets on the way up to the checkout lanes? How about setting up a little buffet dinner for themselves in their carts and eating while they do the rest of their shopping? Sometimes, yeah, maybe, but not often. Why not? Because there are rules about how we act in a grocery store. But we've been socialized, even over years and years, by our grown-ups and their grown-ups about how to act in grocery stores. Some of us may even have been carried out screaming and kicking because we didn't know how to act in those spaces a time or two. Those rules were ingrained in us over time. This process is called socialization. The rules of how to act in society and what to value are installed in us over time. It's how culture is transmitted from generation to generation. But we don't have 5 to 15 years to get our students up to speed on how to act in our classrooms. So we have to shorthand this process a bit. There are some evidence-based rules about rules that you should know as you design the rules you're going to use in your classroom to make this process as smooth as possible. First, you should only have 3 to 5 rules. Don't think that those rules will cover everything that you're going to need for the whole year. But remember that students won't be able to keep more than 3 to 5 rules in their mind at any one time. If you overwhelm them with rules, your likelihood of success is going to be low. Just like with vocabulary words or any other kind of learning, you don't want to give them a huge long list because it's too hard to teach effectively. Pick the rules you need most urgently and focus on them. You can drop off or add on a new rule as your needs change or as the students consistently meet your expectations. Students are smart enough to know that if you replace a rule on the list, you're not saying that you no longer are expecting a certain good behavior. It's just that you're adding in a new focus behavior. You can still thank students for demonstrating a behavior that you expect out of them, even if it's not currently on the list. Second, your rules must be positively stated. Instead of briefly sharing your rules as a long list of things that they shouldn't do, you need to thoughtfully build your rules as a short list of things you want the students to do. This sets you up as a teacher to catch students doing the right things instead of catching students being bad. Do that 200 times a day, and all of a sudden you've created a positive environment in which students want to engage, and an environment from which you don't go home wiped out at the end of the day. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but you're supposed to have 5 positive statements to every negative or neutral comment that you make in your classroom. You need to be churning out those compliments all day long to meet that goal, and this strategy helps you do that. Third, use simple, specific terms. Rules posters are not the place to practice vocabulary or draw out your dramatic prose. You need to repeat these rules many times a day quickly and without missing a beat during your regular instruction. Don't try to be cute, because the joke will be long gone by the 800th time you've told a student that eager eagles easily engage empathy. Just say that in this classroom we care about each other. Finally, the rules should be observable and measurable if you want to collect data on them. One of the best ways to be able to use these rules is to look around the classroom and say something like, I see so many of my students who are ready to learn because they are, and then you state one of your rules. If your rules aren't observable, this doesn't make much sense. Also, seeing a student who is not following a rule is a great cue for you to praise a student who is following that rule. The observability of your rules makes it possible for you to make these praise statements over and over again. Also, if you do need to track behavioral data for any reason, having rules that can be assessed just by observing a student for a second or two makes for accurate and painless data collection. I'm going to warn you that what I'm going to say next could be a controversial viewpoint. Let's see if you agree with me or not. Lots of classroom management sources tell you that you should go through a process when creating your list of rules, wherein you get your class to create their own rules. And for a long time, I thought that was hogwash. I believe that students didn't need you to go through the motions of asking them for their opinions when 9 times out of 10 you already knew what your rules needed to be. In the last few years, however, I came across a way to do this that didn't make me pretend to the students that I had no idea what a functioning classroom looked like and still help them to see their contributions to where the rules ended up. So now, I ask the students to do a think, pair, share about what rules they believe we need for our classroom to function well. During the share portion, I type all of their answers into a mind mapping program that I display on the projector. Once they finish, I type up the rules that I proposed, and I move each one of the rules they had proposed to fit under one of the rules I predetermined. Then they can see how each of their ideas fit alongside each of the rules that I brought to them. Anything that was extra, we either negotiated or we wedged under one of the other rules. This works for me because I can use the rules that I know work and that I don't have to trick the students into believing that I didn't have a plan all along. And it has worked for the students because they see how their contribution has been considered and where it fits into the plan. When it comes to teaching the rules, there is no better way than good old-fashioned explicit instruction. Explicit instruction just means that you're going to directly teach them the rules. You're not going to do any inquiry-based learning or problem solving. You're going to step them through it from start to finish. This graphic demonstrates the parts of explicit instruction as an evidence-based practice, as shared by the Council for Exceptional Children in their book called High Leverage Practices. While this is a special education practice, this works for all learners. So first, make sure you're teaching to the students' zones of proximal development, making sure that they have all the prerequisite skills in place before teaching the future steps. Use concise language. In other words, use the smallest amount of language possible to get your point across. Not all students have a lot of language processing ability, and so the more concise you are, the higher chance you're going to get your point well made. Use appropriate pacing and don't spend too much time on each rule. Keep things moving. Use examples and non-examples. This is particularly important for younger students. Have students show you what it looks like to follow the rule and what it looks like when they're not following the rule. This also gives them a chance to respond to you, asking them to follow the rule or to use the signal that you'll use to get them to comply. Finally, give them praise when they follow the rule, even in the teaching phase. Get them used to receiving praise for doing what you ask, because in the early stages of rule acquisition, students will need more praise than they will once they start internalizing these behaviors. Dr. Anita Archer has 2 videos that are amazing examples of how to teach rules. At the end of this video, I'm going to put a link to her work so you can see a true master. The final thing that I'm going to share with you about teaching the rules is that you must find a way for the rules to become a part of your classroom through the use of a visual anchor. Auditory information is transient, but visual information can remain in your classroom to be used as a reference point for days, weeks, or even the whole year if you want. Whether I'm teaching preschool or college, I have a poster of my rules on the wall or included in my slide deck for every session of class. If I'm teaching from a cart, I post my rules on the front of my cart, or I use a table tent. This is very important because at some point there will be a student who wants to argue with you about the rule simply to argue with you. You point to the poster, restate the rule, and move on. If the student continues, you tell the student that you'll hear them out when you have time, but not when you're teaching, and refer them back to the rule. Maybe you'll even compliment the class for their patience. Your goal is not to disrespect the student by doing that, and you should never ignore if the student has a legitimate need for you to attend to their concern. But hopefully, you will know the difference and avoid being pulled into a conflict when you don't need to be. Let the student argue with the poster while you get back to engaging instruction. Just like socialization determines the cultural rules at the grocery store, you have to set up the cultural rules in your classroom. You want the rules that you choose to be rules that are comfortable for all of your students to follow. If you choose rules that go against the rules that some of your students follow in their home environments, it's going to make it difficult for them to follow your school rules. For example, students from many cultures are taught that cooperation is much more important than competition. But if much of the achievement in your class comes from individual success, it's going to feel uncomfortable for students from a cooperative culture to grab the spotlight, and activities such as speaking out and participating individually might hold them back. Similarly, if a student is taught to self-advocate strongly in the face of injustice, many teachers could interpret that as insubordination or even aggression and remove the student from class. All of these cultural components must be considered when making your rules so that you're not designing bias into your system of classroom rules. If you have any lingering questions or thoughts about establishing and teaching rules in your classroom, please drop me a note in the comments. I truly love the community that one can create in their classroom by designing inclusive rules that support justice. If you have used rules in a way that has supported community in your classroom, even in a little way, we'd all love to read about it. If you like this content, please hit the like button and make sure you've subscribed. If you didn't like the video, leave me a comment and tell me why. But whether you liked it or not, please consider sharing it with just one administrator who you think might have an interest in this content. The topic of next week's video will be how to get your students to be actively engaged with your lessons. Until next time, stay strong, stay healthy, and get some rest.